Greetings and welcome. My name is Dr. Fezi, and I'm continuing with preparing for Domain 1, which is Security and Risk Management, as described in the CISSP body of knowledge. Today we're going to cover the topic Develop, Document, and Implement Security Policy, Standards, Procedures, and Guidelines. The objective of this video is to help you prepare for the CISSP exam and also to learn the basics of information security. So today in this video, I'm going to talk to you about security policy, standards, procedures, and guidelines, acceptable use policy, security standards, baselines and guidelines, security procedures, and procedures to ensure standardization of security across all systems. So here's an overview of what Domain 1 is all about. We talked about it in the first video on Domain 1, so I'm going to skip this slide, but it is still has content that tells you where more information about Domain 1 could be found in the CISSP official body of knowledge textbook. Here's a learning map. So this is the third video in the series of videos that map to Domain 1. And there are other videos that I'm going to be making. There are two other videos preceding this video that talk about the other areas. So security policy, standards, procedures, and guidelines. To help minimize the chances of security failure, meaning a breach of data exfiltration or hacking, the process of implementing security has been formalized with a hierarchical organization of documentation. So at the top of these documentations sits the policies, below that are standards and baselines, below that are guidelines, and then at the bottom are the procedures. So we'll talk about these next. So what is a security policy? Security policy defines the scope of security needed by the organization and discusses the assets that require protection and the extent to which security solutions should go to provide the necessary protection. It contains several elements. So the main objective is the main security objectives and security framework of an organization is contained in the policy. It contains the major functional areas of data processing and all relevant terminology definitions. It contains a strategic plan for implementing security, outlining the security goals and practices that should be employed to protect the organization's vital interests. The security policy also is used to assign responsibilities, define roles, specify audit requirements, outline enforcement processes, indicate compliance requirements, and define acceptable risk levels. The security policy document is often used as a proof that the senior management has exercised due care and due diligence to protect the organization from intrusion, attacks, disaster of sort. So at least you can have some evidence that the management team has tried their best to protect the organization. And it is compulsory to have a security policy. Now let's talk about what are the types of security policies. Several types of security policy can define or outline overall security strategy. Here we talk about three. The organizational security policies that deals with issues relevant to organizational aspects. Issue-specific security policy for a specific network service department, function, or other distinct aspect. System-specific security policy for individual systems or types of systems, and this policy prescribes approved hardware and software, outlines methods for locking down a system, and even mandates firewalls or other specific security controls. So this at least gives you on a piece of paper, on a document format, like basically what it is we're trying to accomplish and the different types of security policies that help us get to that level. Next, the categories of security policies. So we're covering three categories of security policies. Number one, the regulatory policy is required whenever your organization is dealing with legal requirements or governmental requirements that it has to comply. Example of regulatory requirements could be like, you know, like if you're in the medical industry, the FDA, the Federal Drug Administration, has requirements for that. If you're in the finance industries, you may have Sarbanes-Oxley, you may have GLBM, and you may have other standards required by the Department of Defense if you're dealing with the defense industry. And there's many examples of these that organizations have to comply with. Then there is an advisory policy which discusses the behaviors and activities that are acceptable and defines consequences of violation. It explains senior management's desire for security and compliance within an organization. Most policies are advisory. This is basically telling the users how to behave and how to act when they're interacting with the information system so that the security and the information assets of the organization are protected. Then you have the third category of security policy is called the informative policy. It is designed to provide information or knowledge about a specific subject, such as company goals, mission statements, or how the organization interacts with partners and customers. So, additional thing to note here is that an informative policy provides support, research, or background information relevant to specific elements of the overall policy. So these kinds of things give us some basically categories of information security policy that is employed by different organizations. Now I'm going to touch upon the acceptable use policy, AUP. We hear about this. I'm sure most of you have heard of it. An acceptable use policy is often employed for the following purposes. Number one, to assign security roles within the organization as well as to ensure the responsibilities tied to those roles. Very important. You got to have clear lines of responsibilities assigned to clear roles. Number two, it defines a level of acceptable performance and expectation of behavior and activity. More resources are in the information systems, therefore the information system availability, recovery from disaster, those kinds of things have to be mandated so that organization can continue with its business activities. Number three, failure to comply with the policy may result in job action, warnings, penalties, or termination. Another necessary part of the information security policy is to have this level of consequences spelled out so nobody is surprised of their responsibility towards protecting the information security of an organization and then the consequences of failure to do so. Now let's talk about security standard. Once the main security policies are set, then the remaining security document can be crafted under the guidance of those policies. And then again, we have this hierarchy here. So we talked about policies, now we're going to talk about the standard, security standards here. So standards will define your requirements or information for the homogeneous use of the hardware, software, technology, and security controls. They provide a course of action by which technology and procedures are uniformly implemented throughout an organization. Standards are tactical documents, so that's important, distinction. They're tactical documents that will prescribe the steps or methods to utilize as to achieve a goal and the overall direction defined by the security policies. So you can see that, we're adding more detail. That's why the pyramid gets wider. There's less detail here. There's more tactical detail as we go down the pyramid. Now, what is baseline? So at the next level are baselines. A baseline defines a minimum level of security that every system throughout the organization must meet. Now, the systems not complying with the baseline should be taken out of production until they can be brought up to the baseline. Basically, the weakest link is as strong as your information security is going to be. If there's a system that is not in compliance with the baseline, then you have to remove it. Otherwise, your entire network of systems is vulnerable. So it basically, baseline, the idea is to set up a common foundational secure state on which all additions and more stringent security measures can be built. Think of it like the minimum that you have to have, and then you can add but not remove from it. So baselines are usually system specific and often referred to in industry or government standards. For example, the Trusted Computer System Evaluation Criteria, TCSEC, or Information Technology Security Evaluation, ITSEC, or NIST. And the NIST standards are the US based standards, and I believe the National Archives produces them and documents them. So they contain a lot of good information about the various security initiatives that are documented in them. What are guidelines? Which is the next level down. So we talked about policies, we talked about standards, we talked about baseline, now we're going to talk about guidelines. So guidelines are the next element of the formalized security policy structure. They offer recommendation how standards and baselines are implemented. So see, we're going towards more direction, more guidance. We started out with an abstract, more of a strategy level policy, and then we're breaking it down into more detail. Guidelines are flexible, so they can be customized for each unique system or condition and can be used in the creation of new procedures. The guidelines state which security mechanism should be deployed instead of prescribing a specific product or control and detailing configuration settings. They outline methodologies, included suggested actions, and are not compulsory. So again, we don't have the very tactical, very low-level details that are needed, but at least we are trying to build out the intentions and the strategy into more of an implementable steps. So now let's go to the next slide, which is the procedures. Security procedures. Now this is the final element of the standardized policy structure. So a procedure or standard operating procedure, SOP, I'm sure a lot of you have heard that term, SOP, is a detailed step-by-step how to document that describes the exact actions necessary to implement a specific security mechanism, control, or solution. So expect to see a lot of detail here, and with the change in technology, these might have to be updated more frequently as a result of that. A procedure could discuss the entire system deployment operation or focus on a single product or aspect, such as deploying a firewall or updating virus definitions. In most cases, procedures are system and software specific. So this is what I meant when I said, expect to see them evolve more frequently. And they must be updated as the hardware and software of a system evolve. The purpose of a procedure is to ensure the integrity of business processes. Ultimately, IT and business operate in a partnership, and they both need each other. They're partners, and the IT provides resources that help business progress further, and then business has needs that IT meets. So it's a very essential partnership in the modern enterprise. If anything is accomplished by following a detailed procedure, then all activities should be in compliance with policy standards and guidelines. So structurally speaking, when we look at this pyramid here, you can see everything is aligned top down. So we should not expect to have a procedure that is against the intent and the spirit of the policies, or guidelines that are not aligned with the standards or baselines. So this is an attempt to align all this information to protect the information security of an organization. Now let's see what's next. So procedures help ensure standardization of security. The procedures should not be an afterthought. So these are like what we have seen in the industry and defining. Don't create them afterwards. In fact, start with them. So it's not a reactionary measure, but it's a proactive measure. And it should be contained in different documents. We should not include everything in one document. Otherwise, achieving this level of alignment is not very easy. Not all users need to know all the necessary standards, baseline guidelines, and procedures for all security classification needs. So this way we can piece out the information sections and the procedures and guidelines, etc., that the users and departments of an organization need to focus on. And similarly, when changes occur, it is easier to update and redistribute only the affected material rather than updating a monolithic policy and redistributing it throughout the organization. Again, it goes back to the organizational change management, the way people, processes, and tools all interact together tightly to serve the needs of the business and IT business partnership. So there are typically significantly more procedures. This is why we put them at the base of the pyramid. You'll see a lot more procedures than you would see guidelines and so on and so forth. And comparatively, there are fewer guidelines than procedures, fewer still standards, and usually even fewer overarching organization-wide security policies. The security policy defines the overall structure of the organized security documentation. This is how the alignment is achieved. Then, underneath the policy, you have standards are based on those policy plus mandated by regulations and contracts. Underneath that is that we derive from those standards the guidelines. And then finally, we take the guidelines and we break them down into procedures based on the three other components. So this is how alignment is achieved, and the senior leaders of an organization can modify the policy slightly, and then it trickles down and everything is updated accordingly. So I want to thank you for watching this video, and this concludes our topic for today. And again, my name is Dr. Salman M. Fezi, and here's my email listed on the page, and please consider supporting this effort on Patreon. All efforts require support, and any support from you is greatly welcomed. After all, it takes a huge investment of time and resources to produce these videos. And subscribe the content and like if you find it useful, and leave comments. Let's make it interactive. And in the end, best of luck to those of you who are getting ready to take the CISSP exam or embark in your careers. I know you can do it.